Morning people, welcome back to F Politics. The Southport Killer, Axel Rudakubana, has been sentenced to at least 52 years in prison for the killing of Alice da Silva Aguiar, Baby King, and Elsie Stankham, three little girls who were attending a Taylor Swift-themed dance class. Also for the attempted murder of 10 other people and the possession of terrorist materials. Now this was an atrocity that shook the entire country because it led to riots that spread across England and Northern Ireland, with ethnic minorities being hunted. An Asian man was pulled from his car in Hull, a black man was surrounded by 20 thugs in a park and attacked. A gang of the rioters tried to burn down a hotel that had asylum seekers inside. And fueled by conspiracy theories, they even targeted mosques in Southport. They attacked the very town of the victims themselves. One such conspiracy theorist was Nigel Farage.
The police say it's a non-terror incident, just as they said the stabbing of an Army Lieutenant Colonel in uniform on the streets of Kent the other day was a non-terror incident. I just wonder whether the truth is being withheld from.
So he was clearly implying to his followers that this was a terrorist incident, an act of terror. But for it to be an act of terror, it would have to be following some sort of ideology, either political, racial, or religious. And given that Nigel Farage has a habit of lying about British Muslims in order to paint them as terrorists, including just a couple of months before the riots, saying this:
46% of British Muslims support Hamas, support a terrorist organisation.
When in fact he was quoting a survey that asked British Muslims to choose who they had more empathy for, Hamas or Israel, and British Muslims chose the option of neither more than the general population. When Nigel Farage talks about terrorism, you know he's trying to point the finger at Muslims. And he published that video at 5:34 on the day after the attack. And it was that evening that those thugs tried to burn down the mosque in Southport. All this based on the conspiracy theory being spread by people like Nigel Farage, Katie Hopkins, that this was a terrorist incident. Well, today we learn this.
The prosecution have made it clear that these proceedings were not acts of terrorism within the meaning of the terrorism legislation, because there is no evidence that Rudakubana's purpose was to advance political, religious, racial, or ideological cause. I must accept that conclusion.
So it is officially not an act of terrorism because Axel Rudakubana was not acting based on any ideology other than an attraction to extreme violence. Which means Nigel Farage's conspiracy theory about this being an act of terror that the police were hiding from them was simply wrong. He sparked riots that led to people with my skin tone being hunted in the streets based on a lie. Because the ricin that Axel Rudakubana was in possession of wasn't used. The Al-Qaeda handbook that he had was simply about how to commit acts of violence. He didn't actually share any of the ideology within it. But because Nigel Farage is so clearly wrong, he's trying to save face. And so he's pointing at the terrorism charges in relation to the ricin in the handbook to say that he was right, even though the judge just said it was not an act of terror, as was just confirmed by a spokesperson for the UK's counter-terror organisation, Prevent.
The absence of evidence of a motivation means that these acts have not met the legal definition of terrorism.
But both she and the judge made the same point.
That does not make the horrendous acts any less terrifying or terrorising.
And that makes sense. We should be treating it like terrorism. And so if we were to try and squeeze what Axel Rudakubana did into some form of ideology in order to label it as terrorism, which one do you think would count? He went into a girls' dance class and attacked women and girls. What does that sound like to you? And no, I'm not saying that his actions were driven consciously by misogyny, but as the court was told, he decided against attacking his former school, where there would have been men present, and instead chose to attack a place where there would only be women and girls. I personally do not believe that it's a coincidence that he chose a softer target, where he, as an almost fully grown man, would be able to overpower most of the people there. So the concept of violence against women and girls is definitely relevant here. So I know it's not black and white, but definitely it's something that you could argue if we were to treat misogyny as extremism in the courts of law. So I would very much like to see Labour following through on those plans. And no, I'm not saying it would necessarily have prevented what happened in Southport, because Axel was referred to the Prevent counter-terror organisation 3 times and they did nothing. So if there was evidence of sexism being a specific driving factor with this guy, then I think we'd have heard about that in court today, and I didn't. But on the facts of his actions, if we did treat misogyny as a specific form of extremism, then we would have been able to charge him with an act of terror. So I'm more than happy for Nigel Farage and the Reform Party to keep screaming about this issue, as long as they don't cause any more riots. Because the resolution, the lesson that we might all learn from this, is that it's time to start treating men who hurt women as terrorists. And given that the Reform Party has one MP who was convicted of repeatedly kicking his girlfriend, and is closely tied to several high-profile rapists and woman beaters, if we learn the lessons from this case that we're supposed to, This will backfire on them spectacularly. And given that those riots involved violently attacking people and buildings for political and religious reasons, and Nigel Farage and the Reform Party have spent the last 4 months defending the people who organised those riots, the main people who should probably be charged with complicity in acts of terrorism are Nigel Farage and the Reform Party. I'm Femi. Make sure you follow F Politics so politics doesn't F you. Have a great week.